Welcome to HistoryFlix English. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're jumping right into an incredibly high-stakes historical deep dive. We're going to look at a moment in time where the entire trajectory of the Western world literally hung by a thread. This explainer is all about the Battle of Salamis. It's this incredible story of how brilliant strategy, sheer determination, and just a perfectly executed trap managed to completely upend the greatest military superpower of the ancient world. We're talking about a massive empire facing off against a tiny, fractured alliance of city-states. So get ready because this is for sure one of the most fascinating turning points in human history.
So, what if the future of an entire civilization depended on just one single battle at sea? I mean, let that sink in for a second. It sounds like the plot of a crazy Hollywood movie, right? But in the year 480 BC, this was a terrifying reality. The mighty Persian Empire, led by the seemingly unstoppable King Xerxes I, was just sweeping across the known world. They had unmatched numbers, immense resources, and honestly, a track record of crushing absolutely anyone who stood in their way. Greece was right in their crosshairs, and to everyone watching at the time, the absorption of the Greek city-states into this vast Persian Empire felt, well, entirely inevitable.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, a civilization on the brink.
To really grasp the sheer magnitude of the victory at Salamis, we first have to understand the incredibly dire situation the Greeks found themselves in. I mean, this was not a war they were winning. In fact, things were looking spectacularly bleak. Disaster was basically unfolding in three rapid phases. First, you had the fall of Thermopylae. Now, yes, it was a heroic, legendary stand by the Spartans and their allies, but ultimately, it was a costly defeat that kicked the gates wide open to central Greece. The Persian army just pushed deep into Greek territory, which led to our next devastating point. Athens, the absolute jewel of Greece, was evacuated and literally burned to the ground by Persian forces. Imagine the psychological toll of just watching your great city go up in flames. Yet, despite this absolute devastation, the Greek leaders refused to throw in the towel. Instead, they enacted this desperate retreat to the island of Salamis. The grim reality on the ground was that Greece was just one single defeat away from being entirely wiped off the map.
So here's where they stood. The remnants of the Greek alliance consisted of a combined force of roughly 370 warships. The Persian fleet, on the other hand, was universally understood to be significantly larger. It completely dwarfed the Greek resistance. This is your classic David versus Goliath scenario. The Greek commanders knew one thing for absolute certain. If they met this massive Persian armada out in the open sea, Persia's overwhelming numbers would allow them to easily flank and crush the Greeks. Fighting in open water didn't just mean a tough battle, it meant absolute certain doom.
Section 2, Themistocles' brilliant trap.
While a lot of the other leaders were arguing and, seriously considering just fleeing further south to defend the Peloponnese, a brilliant Athenian commander named Themistocles stubbornly believed that this war could still be won. But he knew it could no longer be won on land. It had to be won at sea, and it absolutely had to be won using strategy rather than brute force. So he chose a very specific, confined geography, the narrow Strait of Salamis. He basically looked at the map and realized that the greatest strength of the Persian fleet, its massive size, could actually be turned into its greatest weakness. By forcing the engagement into these super tight, restrictive waters, he could completely neutralize the Persian numerical advantage. They simply wouldn't be able to fit all their ships into the fight at the same time.
This built into an actionable, really masterful three-step plan. Step 1, retreat the Greek fleet into the narrow strait and wait. But Themistocles knew Xerxes might just blockade them and starve them out, right? He needed Xerxes to actively bring his ships inside the strait. So step 2, he engages in some high-stakes psychological warfare. According to ancient accounts, Themistocles sent a secret, fake message directly to King Xerxes, basically claiming that the Greeks were terrified, they were fractured, and they were preparing to slip away in the middle of the night. He made it seem like an easy, glorious victory was right there for the taking. And this perfectly set up step 3, ambush the cramped Persian fleet once they blindly sailed into the trap.
And this brilliantly illustrates the jaws of the trap springing shut. Xerxes, overly confident and super eager to just crush the Greek resistance once and for all, took the bait completely. Believing he had trapped his fleeing enemies, he ordered his massive fleet right into the narrow channel to block their escape. What he didn't realize was that he wasn't the trapper here, he was the prey. The Greeks were waiting in perfect position.
Moving right along to Section 3, Chaos in the Strait.
The very second the Persian ships entered those confined waters, the dynamic of the entire war shifted in a matter of hours. It became this urgent, frantic, and claustrophobic brawl where literally every single wave and gust of wind played a huge factor. As the invading forces crowded into the narrow channel, they immediately struggled to maneuver. Their highly organized formation entirely broke apart.
And because they were packed in so tightly, confusion just rapidly spread through the fleet. Commands couldn't be heard, ships literally couldn't turn around. Meanwhile, the Greek triremes, which were faster and operated by crews who intimately knew these local waters, capitalized on this perfectly. They attacked with ruthless speed and just incredible coordination, darting right between the lumbering Persian vessels.
I really want you to imagine the sheer sensorial overload of this moment. The heavy bronze rams affixed to the front of the Greek ships just smashing into the sides of the Persian vessels. Picture the deafening sound of splintering wooden hulls echoing all across the street. Imagine the chaotic waters filled with thousands of men as sailors were violently thrown into the sea. Because of that confined geography we talked about, there was absolutely nowhere for the Persian ships to retreat.
The sheer number of Persian ships, which, remember, was their greatest asset just a day prior, had now become a massive liability. The strait basically became a deadly traffic jam. In their panic to maneuver or escape the aggressive Greek rams, Persian ships actually began colliding with one another. They were tearing off their own oars and accidentally sinking their own allies. It was an absolute catastrophe for Persia. Using their highly disciplined crews, the Greeks just systematically moved through the chaos, destroying or capturing one Persian ship after another.
And here is a cinematic, almost tragic irony for you. King Xerxes I had actually set up a golden throne on a nearby hillside overlooking the strait. He had situated himself up there, fully expecting to witness a glorious final victory that would officially seal his conquest of Greece. Instead, he was forced to just sit there and watch in absolute horror as his anticipated triumph turned into one of the greatest military setbacks of his entire invasion, right before his very eyes.
Section 4. The Legacy of Salamis.
Now, understanding the mechanics of the battle is one thing, but grasping the massive, world-altering consequences of this single victory is why this explainer really matters to you and me today. The immediate aftermath was completely game-changing. In 480 BC, right after the victory at Salamis, a terrified Xerxes withdrew a large part of his army back to Asia. He was terrified the Greeks would now sail up, destroy the bridges across the Hellespont, and trap him in Europe. This totally fractured the Persian forces. So the very next year, in 479 BC, the Greeks leveraged this momentum to secure another major victory on land at the Battle of Plataea. That final blow officially brought the Persian invasion of Greece to a definitive end.
Crucially, Salamis preserved the independence of the Greek city-states. This is the big takeaway. If Themistocles' trap had failed, Greece would have almost certainly been absorbed into the vast Persian Empire. They would have just become a satrapy, a conquered province, and their unique, fiercely independent culture would have been heavily diluted or entirely extinguished.
And without that independence, think of what we would have lost. The victory at Salamis allowed a spectacular flourishing of ideas. We are talking about the very foundations of Western civilization here. Democracy, philosophy from figures like Socrates and Plato, scientific inquiry, unparalleled literature, and breathtaking art. These cultural cornerstones survived, they evolved, they heavily influenced the Roman world, and ultimately they shaped the very modern societies we live in today. All of these concepts owe a massive, massive debt to those wooden ships in that narrow strait.
More than 2.5 millennia later, the Battle of Salamis stands as far more than just a military engagement. It is a profound triumph of strategy, leadership, and determination. It is the ultimate historical proof that careful planning, a little bit of psychological insight, and fierce unity can overcome even the most overwhelming, seemingly insurmountable power of the time.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If a small, fractured alliance could use geography and strategy to defeat the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen, what impossible odds could you overcome in your own life with the right plan? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me on this HistoryFlix English Explainer. I really hope this deep dive sparked your curiosity. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please make sure to like, subscribe, and keep that hunger for learning alive. We've got plenty more fascinating history to explore together. See you next time.